So we are talking about multi-cloud today, but before we do that, I just want to, I guess, talk about a little story. We just finished our summer break here in the United States, and I remember a couple of weekends ago, I was sitting on the couch with my partner and his three kids, and we were all on our devices because we're a family of this generation of this millennia, and we were all watching something different on a streaming service. We had the kids watching Spider-Man, Harry Potter, and I was watching Pride and Prejudice, and my boyfriend was watching something else. And it made me realize how lucky we are to have this at the palm of our hands, be able to watch anything we want, to stream it just at the click of a button and at a really simple monthly cost. And we have a number of these services today to let us do that as well. And it's that ease and that flexibility that makes it really powerful and makes my summer holiday, my summer vacation really easy. And it reminded me a little bit of how enterprises are approaching multi-cloud as well, that there are lots of cloud services out there for us to choose, different cloud providers offering different capabilities, and we like them all and we want to use them at different times. And just like streaming services, we sometimes end up with more than one, sometimes more than two. And just like streaming services, we sometimes also have a little bit of bill shock at the end of the month. But unlike our movie platforms where we can turn off a subscription, we can't so easily move out of a single cloud provider into another one. We have a lot of other things in enterprise IT that we think about, things like security. I'm not just remembering passwords, I'm remembering all of the resources that I have in a single provider or across all of my platforms. There's a lot of requirements around data protection, around data sovereignty, about where we host our data. And of course, we want to use all of the platforms and all of the capabilities within those services as well. So today we're going to be talking about some of that complexity, and we're going to be talking about the way that NetApp is helping our customers, and we're looking forward to helping a lot of people solve these problems in the multi-cloud. So first up, I'd like to introduce Jeff Baxter. So Jeff has been at NetApp for quite some time, actually.
About 15 years.
Yeah.
Getting there.
So maybe could you introduce yourself? And I remember when I joined NetApp, you were in a very different role with a very different experience. So perhaps introduce yourself and a little bit of your background.
Yeah, so I've been in NetApp now for 15 years. Before that, I was an end user, Unix admin, storage admin, right? And I ended up using NetApp, not knowing what the heck it was, ended up liking it so much, I joined the company, right? So as with many things. So I joined as a systems engineer back in the time, right? And worked with end users. And then after doing that for a while, I was CTO for the Americas, and that was cool until the 99% travel and having toddlers didn't really mix very well, right? They're like, who's that guy who I see every month, right? So I switched over to the product side, and I ended up running product management for ONTAP for several years. And more recently, in the last year, I moved over to the marketing side as part of my trying to get every job in the company. So I just need to finish with legal. They say something about needing a law degree, but legal, finance, and I think housekeeping, and I will have covered every job in the company.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's quite a storied history. And I think we are very fortunate to have you here today because of that background. So like I said, we're talking about multi-cloud, and I guess you're in a perfect position to see, what is multi-cloud in the definition of how NetApp would define hybrid multi-cloud?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think we should, by the way, iterate for the delegates here, right? We'll do some question and answer, but this is a great time for you to jump in as well if you have opinions on all this. So it's intended to be, because no one wants to listen to me talk for 25 minutes, right? That's been verified by multiple family members. So the more you can join in on this. But
Please.
when we think about, we talk about hybrid multi-cloud, and I think most people understand that instinctively at this point, right? What we mean by that, but just for a definitional standpoint, hybrid meaning there's usually still some connection to the data center. We certainly see companies that were born in the cloud and have lived in the cloud that are cloud native and have never touched a data center in their life, right? An increasing number of companies like that. But if we look at the large enterprises and still the majority of IT spend out there, there's some connection to a data center. There's something still going in a data center. So this concept of hybrid is still very important, both for us and for many of our partners in the hyperscalers and the public clouds, right? Working with those on-prem data centers. And then obviously multi-cloud is, relatively self-explanatory in terms of being on one or more clouds. So we know that over 80% of cloud users today are multi-cloud, right? According to multiple different end analysts, ESG, other people like that. And when they talk about over the next 3 years, the number of customers that are going to be in more than 3 clouds, and 3 or more clouds is going to grow from, they project, from almost double, right, 31% up to about 68% of customers out there. So it's not going away. It's not subsiding. In fact, it's growing, the number of customers who are going to be out there in data centers as well as in 3 or more different clouds out there.
Right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Channeling my Howard Marks here. So
Be careful with that.
yeah, I know.
Yeah. Okay.
I love you, Howard. So
Who
when you
doesn't?
say corporations that are in one or more multiple clouds,
Yes.
is that distributed workloads, or is that just one workload in each, cloud, like best of breed?
I think it's incredibly rare these days to have one workload that's split among multiple different clouds. I think that we're starting to see a little bit of that, especially in advanced designs where you're designing for ultra high resiliency, right? We're used to, in the data center, talking about 5 nines or 6 nines. In the clouds, we're usually talking about something like 4 nines, and certainly you can leverage regions and availability zones to increase on that. But there are some ultra high architectures where they're trying to, look at balancing, and we certainly have some architectures, like if you look at things we're doing with Spot and others, where we're starting to look at, okay, can we deploy different instances and move them around in clouds for cost efficiency? But I think the vast majority of that multi-cloud environment is I have one workload on this cloud, I have another workload on this cloud, and another workload on this cloud. I think the interesting evolution that's going on right now is moving that from being accidental to being purposeful, right? So I think today, accidentally, people are on multiple clouds, right? They've got Office 365 over here. They've got some developers doing something on Amazon over here, and they've got an enterprise program going on doing something in DevOps with Google Cloud, for example, right? And it's just kind of evolved that way.
Yes.
We think it's going to be far more purposeful in the future.
I want to add to that as well. I think we're also seeing companies that are trying to leverage, when we say a workload, I think that's what we also need to clarify in definition case, right? What is a workload? Is it a single instance of a particular application running, or is it the way that we are actually running our business processes? And if we think about business processes where we may collect data in one place, but want to analyze it somewhere else, and that somewhere else may be in another cloud provider, or maybe from on-premises into the cloud, I think that's when we're starting to see some of those workflows becoming more multi-cloud. And going back to what is a workload, it could be one workload or one application, one team that's thinking about it that way. I like that.
To add to your point, let's step back even further. Let's define cloud, because I've even had some people.
We could be here all day.
Yeah, because I've even had some people challenge me, go, well, SaaS isn't really part of the cloud. Are you kidding me? SaaS is the original cloud when it's, when we talk about cloud. So, there's like you suggested, Office 365 is a cloud. Others may have workloads in AWS or GCP. That is multi-cloud by accident, which a lot of organizations do have. Then you had Salesforce, and maybe you have a Oracle. So, do we include SaaS, or is multi-cloud inclusive of SaaS, IaaS, PaaS?
I think it would be disingenuous to not include SaaS as part of cloud. I mean,
I would agree with you on that one.
It's delivered as a cloud service. Now, I agree with you that it's traditionally more of I'll call it easy on-ramp to the cloud, right? You're not choosing the cloud per se, you're choosing the SaaS service that you want. And in some cases, the cloud delivery of it is incidental. And in a lot of cases for the end enterprise, right, they don't have a choice as to what cloud it's being delivered on. You choose your SaaS provider, and they're making the choice in the back end on what hyperscale they want to run on. So I think the interesting evolution is becoming hybrid multi-cloud, to bring it back to this point, on purpose, right? As opposed to accidentally being hybrid multi-cloud because you've chosen a best-of-breed SaaS vendor for multiple different workloads. You're actually directly choosing, I want to operate with Google Cloud directly as an entity. And in some cases, it's about where do you have the business relationship, right? Do you have it with a SaaS provider? Are you sending your money to that SaaS provider? Or are you actually sending it directly to Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure or Amazon Web Services? And that business relationship, I think, is where it starts to rotate.
So I want to move on to sort of some of the common misconceptions about moving into a cloud provider or a multi-cloud environment, like you said. What are some of those that we think, moving out of a data center into the cloud should be easy, but like you said, there are some, I guess, misconceptions or perhaps unknowns there?
I think, moving into the cloud, in some cases, I think is seen as a panacea, and I think anyone who's done that recognizes that it's not in and of itself a panacea. You are trading a certain amount of complexity within the data center. I think any of us who operate inside a data center understand that complexity, understand the needs of trying to keep something running at 5 nines or 6 nines. If you've ever had a lightning strike on your data center or an actual sewage spill into your data center, that was not a good day, by the way. I'll tell you that story over dinner. Actually, I shouldn't tell the sewage spill over dinner. It's not appetizing. But so we've traded those sort of complexities for the complexities now of operating in a cloud environment and operating in an environment where not everything is completely under our control. And some things we only learn when we actually sort of trip over them for the first time in the cloud, especially when you start to get into a multi-cloud environment and you're dealing with the different APIs, the different command sets, the different portals of all of these different clouds and trying to achieve interoperability for your business across them.
Sure.
Well, so hold on a second.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we come back to Fumala's question of let's.
Fumala. Sorry.
I am so sorry.
It's okay.
Of let's define cloud. I mean,
Yeah.
So from the perspective of this presentation, are we defining cloud as quote as hyperscaler? GCP, AWS, Azure. I mean, there's an entire other end of the spectrum that takes care of all of those things still, but it's still more traditional workloads, and I think that's all part of the conversation. Is that in scope here as well? Or?
Oh, that absolutely in scope. I think that's a good point. Do you want to say a little bit more about that? Are you talking about cloud service providers? Are you talking down that direction?
Well, I mean,
that some clouds were perhaps out on a different island than
no.
other.
Yeah. No.
There was an inside joke there that someone's going to explain to me at some point.
So I mean, there are cloud service providers, but I mean, I would make the argument that once we started virtualizing workloads, we were creating clouds.
Yeah.
And so, it's a hybrid cloud should take all of those things somewhat into account. And definitely we should be optimizing for each of those, different workloads have different needs. The reality of it is there's still legacy applications that aren't going to be cloud native now or probably in the next 10 years.
Right.
Unfortunately. I wish that they were gone, but yeah. I just definitely let's keep, that in scope.
Yeah, I absolutely want to talk about that a little bit as well, that when we think about cloud at NetApp, and I think sometimes we see the cloud providers and I mean all cloud providers, even private cloud providers, people providing platforms for their business units, for their application teams, for their for other users as well as part of the cloud story. And we don't really, I mean, we differentiate logically that there is a public cloud or hyperscaler cloud and a private cloud, but we really want to think about them as a single place that you would go or something that you would build, and then the place that a developer might go or a data scientist might go to get a service. And so, one of the things that I'm seeing definitely, and we talked about a little bit before this, Jeff, was the evolution of how platform engineering is really becoming, again, a cool term, where it was a cool term a couple of years ago, where we are trying to build these platforms. And it shouldn't matter. What you really want at the end of the day is, do I get the outcome that I was actually looking for? Was that it? Do I care that it was in a public cloud provider on premises? As long as I got the right security and I had the right service and I have the right time to delivery, then it shouldn't really matter. And that's really one of the things that I think we're seeing a lot more, and we'll be demonstrating. Yay!
Yeah.
Every time we go to
I think it really is that evolution that you're talking about of cloud to. I think we have to be careful when we talk about abstraction layers because that means something technically, right? And when we talk about virtualization, that means something technically. But it's this concept of instead of it having to be a net new learning curve with every new data center, cloud service provider, hyperscaler or public cloud provider, and it's a completely new learning curve, that it's part of the platform each company is building for themselves, right? And I think that's the important evolution where we're looking at a world where we move beyond sort of walled gardens where each individual is its own individual experience, and every time you stand up a new workload, it's a brand new learning experience, to how can we abstract that up so that just as, you mentioned virtualization, just as if you bring in a server from another vendor, it's not relearning everything. You might be, going back a couple of years, maybe you're dealing with the offline management is a little bit different, right? The BIOS is a little bit different, but everything up the stack has been abstracted, has been built into a process and is, part of a workflow, right? How do we do that, but up-level it to the cloud layer, essentially?
So I'm going to ask that. Yes.
Can I ask a question on the multi-cloud environment? In the mobile industry, right, we've got 5G being deployed by the service providers, also the enterprise, and they have very much a concept of moving data towards the edge to reduce backhaul and also latency. So how does the multi-cloud then incorporate data on the edge for those kind of environments? What's your perspective there, and how are you working on that?
So I think it's a great question. And honestly, I think it's a good open conversation. I think that we're very nascent today as to whether the edge is considered to be its own domain, its own category that's treated entirely differently, or if the edge is extensions of the cloud and will be managed as the cloud service, right? And I think that even, I'll be really honest, vendors like to come up here and say, we've figured everything out, right? I mean, I think we're learning as well about how we want to treat the edge, because, we'll demonstrate, my colleague will demonstrate sort of our cloud manager software and how we think about managing resources across the cloud. When you start thinking about thousands or tens of thousands of endpoints, if every car is an endpoint, some of those traditional models start to break down, right? You're not going to model it as though you have 10,000 data centers, even though in some cases you have 10,000 data centers on wheels. So I think that I don't think we've entirely figured this out, right? I think this is a challenge that all of us in the industry have to figure out right now, is how we're gonna model that, right? And is data truly going to live out in the manufacturing facility, in the car, in the air, or is it a respite for AI ML to gather some insights, and those insights are going to be pushed back, right? And I think it's probably going to be more the latter, just because even though with 5G and everything like that, bandwidth is not increasing at the same rate as the rate of data growth, right? So we're still going to have that inequity in the pipe getting to the data.
One of the things I see, and I'm not a storage person, so jump all over me, but but one of the things I see is that when we look at data, the same piece of data needs to be in different places in the network now to be acted on in a different way. So at the edge, it's much more responsiveness. We want to act on it. In the center, it's more analysis. And dealing with how we deal with data when it doesn't exist in one place, I think is perhaps the biggest challenge, to think re-architect our networks that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. A lot of what we've been doing, especially in the AI ML space, is moving away from the idea of storage, right, where data goes to a place, and think about it as a pipeline, right, where data is always in transit. In some cases, it's in more than one place, right?
Exactly.
And so when we built out like our data science toolkit and other things like that, it's based upon the assumption that there may not be an authoritative final state where the data is. It may be constantly existing in this pipeline that will go from edge to maybe a data center, right, maybe a cloud. We think most likely it'll go from edge to cloud, right, do some processing there, and then maybe be stored on a data center for long-term archival sort of, use. But yeah, definitely, I think it's going to be moving into more of a pipeline.
So I have a question there, and this relates to the pipelines and the workflows, right? Because do you guys see that we're at the point where we have workflows that maybe even the people who you sell to and who actually manage traditional data centers now, do they even understand these terms? I mean, we've spent this long talking about the definition of cloud and multi-cloud. So, do you guys see us at a state or getting to the state where people need to start really understanding what these workflows are, because that's how applications are being written? Or are the developers there with these ideas? I mean, like, because it seems like there's a mismatch of how infrastructure will be to how infrastructure needs to be when we finally start developing applications this way.
Yeah, and I think we go back, and I come from an architecture background, so I'm always asking, okay, that's cool, but so what? Why do I need this? What is the reason that we are building a really cool feature in NetApp? And I think it comes back to, we need to understand what those requirements are, whether it's an application that's going to live in a place with persistent data in a single location, or whether it's a workflow and the data is going to move around. We really need to understand what is it that we are trying to do, and then the infrastructure has to support that flexibility. And I think that's what we're looking towards. And I mean, not to speak for Jeff here, but I think what we're definitely seeing is helping the infrastructure be more flexible, helping the decisions that you make be flexible, so that you are not going through a single decision path that is going to lead you down, a particular architectural route that then you realize, oh gosh, I now need that at the edge. How, do I have to unwind all of those decisions? So yeah, I definitely see that happening.
Wouldn't it also be said that if I was going to create cloud, I'll use quotes here, as a good operational guy, I would say, cloud is an operational model, it's not a destination, right? We've heard that used multiple times before. And I think it's interesting in all these different discussions that we hear, there are things that we take for granted now, like platforms. Like, for instance, if I go to AWS, it has a GUI that I can go click, 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 boom, 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 and then all of a sudden stuff gets spun up and it just works, right? And we get used to this idea of cloud as that platform. So maybe that is what is the connector when we talk about all these multi-clouds, because at the end of the day, it's an operations model that takes things into assumption kind of like a declarative language. Like it knows that there are things that are going to be there, and then it builds based off of that.
I think that's exactly right. While you were saying, I was thinking there was an old SNL skit talking about something that was both a floor wax and a dessert topping, right? I don't know if you're, I'm dating myself, right? So I think cloud is honestly both of those things, and I think that's where a lot of the confusion stems from, right? Because I think I think to be fair, cloud can describe, the hyperscalers at a certain scale, because there does become almost like this transformation called a cloud singularity or something. When you get to a certain number of cores in data center under management, something transforms, something happens, right? Something that none of us are going to be able to achieve, even in the Fortune 5, right, within the scope of a data center. It's just, it's more than the sum of its parts when you get to that sort of scale. Not to mention the number of sheer bodies and intelligence that people like AWS or Azure or Google Cloud can throw at problems when they want to solve them. So it is a thing, right? I know we were joking offline before about the bumper sticker, right? Cloud is just someone else's data center. And I think that's true, but it's a massive reinvented data center, right? It's like saying that a battleship is just a upscaled sailing boat, right? It's like, nah, I mean, they both go across the water, but one's got scale, right? So, but at the same time, I think what's more important is cloud as a model, right? And cloud as this way in which you operate across disparate resources and across the hybrid multi-cloud.
So Jeff, I want to ask then, we're here with some great presenters from NetApp. What is that NetApp perspective on, and how is NetApp making what we would consider cloud services, whether it's a reinvented data center or whether it's workflows? How is NetApp making that better?
Yeah, so I think the number one thing about NetApp to understand is that we have been really all in on the cloud since cloud wasn't cool, right? Like we were like, had our pocket protectors and saying this cloud thing is awesome back when a lot of would have been considered traditionally on-prem companies were seeing the cloud as potentially a threat, right? And we've always seen the cloud as an opportunity. That's the reason why we have these best-of-breed partnerships with Google Cloud, with Microsoft Azure, with Amazon Web Services, right? In terms of engaging with them, I think we did our first demo of our software running on the cloud in 2015, 2014, something like that, right? And we were talking about that. It's going close to 7 or 8 years now, right? So from our perspective, the cloud is absolutely critical. It's an absolutely huge imperative. And our goal is to build this sort of ecosystem around it so that companies can take advantage of the hybrid multi-cloud without necessarily having to refactor all of their data, all of their applications, or to support them if they are refactoring, right, as they move to the cloud.
And when you think about some of the challenges that we talked about here, from edge to developers to, how are we consuming the cloud? Is it something that we need through APIs?
Yeah.
What is happening with NetApp's, I guess, platforms or our products in that space to make them more friendly to people who perhaps are not, familiar with NetApp from 20 years ago? Yeah. So the first thing I want to do is not steal Chuck Foley's thunder for the demo later, because I think he knows where I live. In Jersey, but I don't want to steal a lot of that thunder. And in fact, that's what we'll spend the majority of the day. If people are getting tired of listening to me talk, right? Cool demos are coming in less than 10 minutes. So stand by for that. Don't tune out just yet. But we're building our software to be essentially cloud agnostic and data center agnostic, right? We're building, and everything we do now is cloud first in terms of how we deliver things, delivering it as a SaaS sort of offering, right? And so you look at these services and they're all embedded into our cloud offerings such that our customers can use it across any of the hyperscalers of their choice. We even support, when you look at observability, right, and things we've done traditionally there, not just traditional NetApp things in the data center, but basically just about any storage or data infrastructure that can run in the data center. We're trying to offer that visibility for customers so they can actually see what's going on in real time right there. And we actually think one of the key things we can do is deliver that observability, right? Because I think that's been one of the biggest challenges is once your data gets out in the cloud is where is it? It's kind of a dude, where's my data sort of moment, right? And so being able to provide that visibility so that then we can offer value-added services around compliance, around governance, around privacy. We really see that as the future of the company, right? We want to provide that visibility. And the way NetApp's a for-profit company, right? The way we continue to grow and the way we continue to build this is to offer not just keeping people in walled gardens or silos, but offer these value-added services across their data wherever it is. That's awesome. So last question for you then, is if we look at the multi-cloud or the cloud as we've defined it here today, what is one thing that we would like people to do, or what's one thing that you think that they should do in order to really empower and evolve their cloud strategy?
It's a great question. So I think the key thing to be doing right now is to really look at, instead of looking at it in silos, instead of looking at it, what are we doing with this cloud? What are we doing with that cloud? Is really trying to establish what is your overall multi-cloud strategy moving forward, right? And move it from being, we had this discussion at the very start of our discussion, move it from being this thing that happens by accident on a workload by workload basis to being intentional, right? Like, how am I building a management platform in the future? I think a lot of us for our data centers, in some ways almost lucked into having vSphere as our management console of choice, right? It kind of came with the package, right? That was, we used to, a decade or more ago, we used to say that everyone thought the hypervisor was the secret sauce of VMware, but there were multiple hypervisors. The real magic was the first time you did a vMotion, right, between machines, and then you were hooked, right? So it's how do we, instead of having that happen by accident, how do we start to build out a control plane? How do we start to build out this sort of hybrid multi-cloud visibility and control intentionally so that we're taking control of our destiny as we move into the multi-cloud instead of just having it thrust upon us?
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I'll leave you with that point, to take control of your multi-cloud destiny. Thanks so much for joining me here today.
Thank you, Phoebe. Thanks.